many things I learned when I took the baking class with the master chef in Paris was how to make croissant and pain au chocolat, and I would love to share this recipe with you today. I have such fond memories of when I lived in Paris, you know, going down to a cafe, having your croissant with a grand crème, and just enjoying, you know, a beautiful morning. And I feel like it's hard to find nice croissants outside of Paris or outside of France, which is why I was very excited when I learned how to make this, you know, these croissants. And my daughter loves them so much. She says they taste just like in Paris. So here we go. Today I will teach you how to do that so that you can have fresh croissant and pain au chocolat, or chocolate croissant as you say also here in the US, at your house. Okay, so first of all, again, as always, I like to use my food processor, or you could use the dough function in your bread maker or your stand mixer or your hands. You just have to make sure that you knead it very well. So I start with 1 3/4 cup of milk, cold milk, just like with the water when I make the bread. You always want to make sure that everything is nice and cold. I add 3 tablespoons of melted butter, and to the liquids I add 4 teaspoons of yeast, of instant yeast. Then a 1/4 cup of sugar, and I always like to go in this order: the liquid ingredients first, the yeast, the sugar, then I add the flour, 4 1/4 cup of flour. So if you use your food processor, make sure that you have a large one. If it's too small, you know, anything under 8 cups will be difficult to blend that much quantity of dough. I then add 2 teaspoons of salt, and that's it for the ingredients. So the difference with bread is that you add melted butter and sugar, because of course you get a bit of that sweet taste. All right. Blend this into a nice long dough. Check it. Yeah, it's a little moist, so I'm going to add a little bit more flour. Just like with the bread, you want it to be not too dry, but not too wet either. So here we go. Let's see if my blender will work. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so I have taken that piece of dough that I just mixed in my food processor and spread it out into a 10 by 7 inch rectangle, and I will now wrap it up in some plastic foil and let it rest, preferably overnight, but at least for 2 hours. The longer the better for dough, as it becomes more elastic, nice, you know, easier to handle, and just also develops a nicer flavor if it rests in the fridge overnight. So I will put this into the fridge now. So while the dough is resting, I have shaped 24 tablespoons of butter, that is the equal, you know, 3 sticks of butter, into a 8-inch square. The butter that you should really use is European style butter, because it contains more fat, and that's how you will develop that wonderful flaky crust that you get with croissants. So I like to use Plugra or Kerrygold, or there's a bunch of brands out there that do this European style butter, and it's just very important that you use that for croissant. So what I did is I traced an 8-inch square onto a piece of parchment paper, and I kind of shaped the soft butter into that square, and put another sheet of parchment paper over it, and let it rest in the fridge for at least a couple of hours so that it gets nice and hard. In Paris or in France, the bakers, they actually can buy these flat blocks of butter to make their croissants, but we don't have that, so we just have to be creative about how to achieve the same effect here in the US. So here's my piece of dough that rested in the fridge overnight. I will now roll it out into a rectangle that is 17 by 8 inches. So a longer rectangle. So I have, just to make it easier, measured out a piece of parchment paper, which is exactly the size that I need, just because it's easier than trying to measure it with a measuring tape while you're rolling it out. So I'm kind of using that as my guideline. It's 8 inches wide already. I have lightly dusted the countertop with flour, and I'm using a metal rolling pin. I am giving you the reference for that in my recipe on my website. Having a metal rolling pin just is much better for making pastries altogether, even dough, even cookie dough, but especially croissants, because you want to try to keep that dough as cold as possible at all times. Otherwise, the mixture of the butter and the dough will just make a bit of a mess and make it quite mushy. So anyway, I always like to put this metal rolling pin into the freezer, and then I take it out and I try to recreate the effect that the French bakers have. We actually have cold countertops when they work with pastry. They have a cooling unit underneath them in marble, but we don't have that. So anyway, this is the best I can do. So I roll it out, and here you see, having that piece of parchment paper right next to it makes it easier for me just to kind of know that I have the right measurements for my piece of dough. And once I obtain that, I will start the magic of flaky croissants. So I take my piece of dough, and I like to make it flush with the countertop, so that I kind of have a good guideline here. Okay, let's try to make sure that this is a nice rectangle. You can see, if you're not careful, the dough can fall apart a little bit, but here we go. This is good. And then I will take that cooled piece of butter, so the 8-inch square, is nice and hard. So this is the result of 1.5 packs of plus gras butter, and I will fold one side over and the other, and we'll make sure that I pinch together the dough so that it's nice and sticks together. And I'm also pinching together the end bits, because otherwise, once you start rolling out, all the butter will come out and get squashed out. So here's the beginning of the wonderful croissants. You then have to roll it out into a rectangle, which is 24 by 8, so a little bit bigger. And what we're doing now is we're doing the first one of 3 turns, which is again how you will achieve the flaky French croissant effect. So you have to be very gentle when you do this. If you press and hammer on it too hard, all the butter will come out, and it just won't be as homogeneous as you would like. So I'm going to work on this. So now I have this nice big rectangle, 24 by 8 inches. As I can see, I can measure it with my piece of parchment paper, and I fold it in 3. So I take the bottom part and fold, the bottom third, and fold it over, and then I fold over the top third. And here I have a nice block, and what I will do now is I will put this into the freezer for at least 30 minutes. 30 minutes is fine, and let it cool down, and then we will repeat the process 2 times with a 30-minute resting time in the freezer between each time. And I will also put my rolling pin in the freezer at the same time, just to make sure it's nice and cold. And doing this, doing these 3 turns allows the butter to nicely blend with the dough, but also at the same time to keep its nice, make the dough very flaky, so that you achieve the croissant effect. So the half hour was up. I took the dough out and I spread it out again into this rectangle of 24 by 8 inches. So I'm just showing you once again. you have to work with the dough a little bit. If it's a bit too wide, then you just press it together and you just try to incorporate the butter as well as you can. So now I have the right size, and I'm going to do the same thing as I did earlier. I'm going to take the bottom third of the dough and fold it over, and then take the top third of the dough and fold it over again. And here we go. I have another parcel again that I will put into the freezer yet again for another half hour, and then we will repeat this procedure once more. Put it into the freezer for another half hour, and then we will start shaping the croissants. So after giving my croissant dough 3 turns and leaving it in the freezer for a final time of 30 minutes, I've now taken it out and I have rolled it out to a rectangle that's 16 by 18 inches. So you just really make sure that you have a nice, even, flat piece of dough, and you measure it. I have a little tape measure, so I see, so this is 18 by, actually I can roll it out a little bit more. Just make sure it's nice and wide and has an even thickness. Now, okay. Let me see again. Here we go, 16, 18, perfect. So what I do then is I take a pizza cutter. I'm sure you all have one of those. I mean, a knife is fine too, but this just kind of makes it very easy to cut the dough and to glide through it. And I cut it in half. So that would be, you know, at 8 inches. There we go. And I take one of the halves and put it onto a baking tray that's covered with a piece of parchment paper. And I'm just going to put it in the fridge for now, because I want to make sure that it stays nice and cold while I work with the other dough. I'm just going to do that for now. And then I'm going to start working with this to make the first batch of croissants. And actually what I will do today is I will make croissants with this one half of the dough, and I will make the pain au chocolat with the other half. So I will be able to show you both types of pastries. So what I do is now I have this piece of dough which is 18 by 8 inches, and I measure out a 3-inch piece and I cut diagonally, just so that you create the shape of a croissant. And what you do then, you take a pair of scissors and you cut a little slit into the bottom, and you stretch the dough on the bottom, and you also stretch the dough in the top part. And then you start rolling up the dough at the wider end very tightly, but don't press too hard, because then, you know, you will have just a smushed up piece of dough. But you just roll it up, you achieve this croissant shape, and you turn in the end pieces, and you make sure that when you place it onto your baking tray that's covered with parchment paper, that you put the end piece, you know, the pointed piece, underneath the croissant. Otherwise it will all fall, you know, blow up and just not look as nice. It'll still be tasty, but they have a tendency to, how to say, to just, you know, to do their own thing if you don't really kind of restrain it and put the piece of dough underneath it. I will show you. Anyway, let's do it again. So here I'm going to do another piece of triangle, and this time I'm going to measure the 3 inches in the top part of that piece of dough. So I have a little mark, I go across. And basically you make a whole bunch of triangles by just going, you know, and you measure it out to 3 inches, unless you feel like you can judge. Here we go. Nice. And the end piece isn't so nice, so we'll see, we'll just be a little bit creative with that. But every time you have your piece of your triangle, you take the longer end, you cut a piece of a slit in the base, and you stretch it out at the top a little bit, and you just roll it up nice and tight. And as I say, you leave that piece, that top piece, underneath the croissant, and you turn in the edges to make that nice crescent shape. And then you kind of place it firmly onto your baking sheet. Okay, let's do this one. Okay. So it's not really difficult. It just takes a little bit of, practice, but you'll manage that in no time. Really is just the technique. And sometimes they don't turn out too nice, but that's not a big deal. So I think I'm going to have another baking sheet because this is getting a little bit crowded. You want to give them enough space. They do tend to get, twice the size, and you don't want them to bake all together. Okay, so now I took out the other piece of dough that I put in the fridge while I was making the croissants. And as you see, it's a rectangle again, 18 by 8 inches. And I'm going to cut pieces that are just over 3 inches wide, because I have these little chocolate sticks that you get, you can order them on Amazon. They're the typical sticks that you put into the chocolate croissant, the pain au chocolat, which melt, in a wonderful way when they're baked, and that give you that nice chocolatey taste. So that works. I'm guessing that you could also use chocolate chips if you line them up, or some other chocolate, but this one I really recommend it. It does create the authentic pain au chocolat experience. And so what I do is I cut out these pieces, these 3-inch pieces. Once I have a 3-inch piece, just like a rectangle, I put two of them, because you want to make sure it's nice and chocolatey, 2 bars in there, and then I roll them up fairly tightly, and once they're rolled up like this, I put them with a seam at the bottom onto my baking tray. And again, make sure that you give yourself enough space between each of these croissants and pain au chocolat, because they will rise considerably to double the size and when they bake. Otherwise, you just have it all baked together. So here we go again. We're going to make, so it's 3 and 2 inches. Finished with making all these croissants and pain au chocolat, I will cover them up, the trays, with some plastic wrap, and let them rise for 2 hours, and then I will brush them with some egg mixed with water and a pinch of salt, so that you can achieve that nice golden effect, and then we'll put them into the oven. But I will tell you more about that in a little while when we're ready to bake. Okay, so the croissants have now doubled in size. I'm going to put this egg wash. It's 1 egg, a little bit of water, and a pinch of salt. And you brush that onto all the croissants and the pain au chocolat, so that you get a nice golden color when they bake. That, and then I have heated up the oven to 400 degrees, and we will leave them in there for 20 minutes and turn them around after 10 minutes, just to make sure that they all have even color, as we know that most ovens don't have the same heat in all the different parts of the oven. So here we have these lovely croissants. As you can see, they have doubled in size. I'm going to put those in on one level. I'm just going to bake 2 trays at the same time. This is a convection oven, and here are the croissants. And what I will do is, after 10 minutes, I will switch them around just to make sure that they're all even, evenly golden. Okay, so now at the halfway mark, after 10 minutes, I want to turn the trays around. You can see this one is quite pale, so we're going to put that on the top shelf, put the other one on the bottom shelf, and if you want, you can even turn the whole tray around, which is also good. It just really depends on your oven. And I'm going to leave them in there for probably another 5 minutes. Okay, so they just came out after 15 minutes, so you have to see that you want them golden brown, and I think that they look lovely. So I'll let them cool down and I'll taste them. So this was a little bit more work than my other recipes that I like to make, but it's definitely worth it.